Good day, and welcome to Diksha. On today's episode, I will take a look at animal sacrifice. On today's episode, we take a look at the act of sacrificial worship, or in particular, animal sacrifice. Now, within the Hindu community, it's a very debated topic that some factions or some beliefs within the Hindu community condemn animal sacrifice, and a couple of factions in the Hindu community support it. Now, in today's episode, I'm not going to try to justify or condemn the Hindu practices of animal sacrifice, but rather I'm going to take a look at what happens globally in terms of animal sacrifice, or the sacrificing of animals to God. Animal sacrifice, or as we may not be aware, animal sacrifice is something that takes place globally. Now, we have many ancient cultures that have practiced it, that have discontinued the practice, or it is not part of the mainstream practice. For example, in the Jewish faith, the act is called korban, and we hear reference to it in the Bible, where a lamb was sacrificed on a fire to appease God. And this ritual is a very formal ritual. So there are prescribed steps to it, and prescribed manners in which the animal or the offering is sacrificed. And this method of sacrifice has occurred over a period of well over 1,000 years, or close to 2,000 years. So animal sacrifice at the time was not a trend, or it wasn't fashionable, but was rather a prescribed and established form of sacrifice within the Jewish religion. Even in our modern society, or modern day world society, animal sacrifice is part of the mainstream of the Muslim religion, and we refer to meat first offered to God and sacrificed to God as being halal. So all halal meat, and I'm merely portraying the example, I'm not trying to say anything about the Muslim faith, but all halal meat has been sacrificed first to God and is then deemed fit for consumption. So even in ancient cultures completely isolated from the old world, and the old world being Asia and Europe, but in the Americas we had the Aztec and the Mayan civilizations, which in their day, at the height of their civilizations, also practiced sacrificing of living beings, whether animals or humans. So blood sacrifice was an integral part of those societies. And I know in modern day Asian cultures, especially in Japan, they still tend to offer cooked meals which comprise of meat to ancestors and to the deities. So the offering of meat and blood and animal is something that has taken place throughout the world history and is still practiced today. The example given is, of course, the Muslim faith and the halal meats. Now, this brings me to the issue of animal sacrifice in the Hindu religion, where the mainstream Hindu personalities condemn the sacrificing of animals. and especially offering blood to the deities and in using any form of flesh in worship. And then we have what may not be considered mainstream Hinduism, which accepts or which supports the offering of animals. Now, where could this have come from? Where could this conflict have come from? To me, I think if we look at the history of India, we may find a certain period in history where the Hindu society would have adopted the practice of animal sacrifice. And I think if we look at the period between 12th century and 16th century AD, when the Muslims were invading India and invading Asia and spreading their faith, the Hindus would have come into contact with the act of animal sacrifice from the Muslims. Now, what we have to remember is that the Muslims had invaded India and had established themselves as the ruling class in India. So, in that period, the Hindu population had become the second in command within India, which means that the ruling class within India at the time was Muslim, and the Muslim practices were considered higher than the Hindu practices in that time period. Now, if we look at the social behavior of people in general, people will tend to adopt the practices of the ruling caste as practices in their daily life in order to appeal to or to gain favor from or to be on good terms with the ruling caste. So we can see where now it would have been best for survival, and it would have been it would have offered, or it would have opened rather, a lot of avenues to Hindus if they had incorporated things from the Muslim religion to appeal or to gain favor with the Muslims. And one major way to do this was where the religious practices seemed to resemble what the Muslims were practicing, especially considering that Muslims would not accept any food that was not offered to God first. And in the Muslim faith, they especially considering their meats offered to God first. So we can see where the Hindus would have adopted a practice as a social adjustment. And I think it is this point in history where they would have developed the habit of animal sacrifice. Now, why is this not portrayed, or why is this idea not portrayed in today's Indian society? It's simply because over time, the reason for it adopting a practice would fade into obscurity, and the practice itself would remain. And this is seen across the board with what you will call sattvic Hindu practices, which includes the sacrifice of or the offering of fruits and flowers and things like milk and honey and sattvic foods. No one knows really why they do it, but it is the established practice. So the same can be said for why animal sacrifice or flesh being offered. Nobody really knows why, but it is a continued practice adopted hundreds of years ago from the Muslim tradition. So this is my opinion on giving a possible explanation as to why there are flesh sacrifices within the Hindu society. Now, whether this is good or bad, I cannot say. Whether it is something to be shunned or praised, I also cannot say. I'm just offering a possible explanation as to why or where the practice would have been adopted. So this brings me to the end of my short presentation today on animal sacrifice within Hinduism and animal sacrifice on the world stage. Again, my point of view is simply my assessment of the situation and is by no means trying to justify or condemn the act of sacrificing animals. So, thank you for joining me today on Diksha. My name is Omkar, and I'll see you next time.